Imagine this, a vast ocean battlefield, where every decision could tip the scales of war. The fate of nations balanced on the wings of a few daring pilots and the strategies of brilliant commanders. The year is 1942, and the Pacific Ocean is about to erupt in one of the most consequential naval battles in human history. This is the story of the Battle of Midway, a tale of devastating power. A battle where the mighty Japanese fleet sought to crush American resistance and claim dominance over the Pacific. What happened instead was nothing short of extraordinary. Chapter 1: The Road to Midway. The Japanese Empire was at its peak. In just 6 months, their forces had swept through Southeast Asia, capturing Hong Kong, the Philippines, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. Their fleet, led by the powerful aircraft carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, dominated the Pacific. But the attack on Pearl Harbor awakened a sleeping giant. The United States, though reeling from the blow, was preparing for a counterstrike. The Doolittle Raid, a daring bombing of Tokyo in April 1942, shook Japan to its core. Though its military impact was minimal, the psychological effect was enormous. For the first time, Japanese civilians experienced the horrors of war firsthand. In response, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto devised a plan to crush American morale once and for all, a surprise attack on Midway Atoll. Midway was more than a speck of land in the Pacific. It was a vital outpost for the U.S. Navy, serving as a forward base for reconnaissance and bomber operations. Yamamoto believed its capture would lure the remaining American carriers into a trap, ensuring Japan's total dominance. But there was a problem. Unbeknownst to Yamamoto, the Americans were listening. In one of the war's greatest intelligence triumphs, American cryptographers had cracked Japan's naval code, Giant 25. They intercepted messages referring to AF, a target of critical importance. To confirm it was Midway, a clever ruse was devised. The U.S. sent an uncoded message stating that Midway's water supply was failing. Within hours, the Japanese responded, revealing AF was indeed Midway. Armed with this knowledge, Admiral Chester Nimitz devised a plan to turn the tables. Every available ship and aircraft was mobilized to ambush the Japanese fleet. It was a gamble, one that would change the course of history. Chapter 2: The Forces Assemble. On the American side stood 3 aircraft carriers and a determined fleet of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. The USS Yorktown, heavily damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea, underwent miraculous repairs at Pearl Harbor in just 72 hours. Crews worked day and night to patch her flight deck and restore her fighting spirit. Facing them was the fearsome Japanese fleet, led by Admiral Yamamoto and Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo. 4 of Japan's most powerful carriers sailed into battle, their decks bristling with fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes. But the Japanese fleet carried an unseen flaw: overconfidence. Believing the Americans were weakened and unprepared, they underestimated the resilience and ingenuity of their enemy. Chapter 3: The Battle Begins. The first clash came on June 3rd, when American bombers launched a surprise attack on Japanese ships near Midway. Though the bombs missed their mark, they sent a clear message: the Americans were ready. At dawn on June 4th, Nagumo launched his main strike against Midway. Waves of Japanese bombers and fighters descended upon the atoll, causing heavy damage. But the island's defenders, though outmatched, fought fiercely. Major Floyd Parks and his Marine aviators engaged the Japanese in desperate dogfights. Their Brewster Buffaloes and Wildcats were no match for the sleek Mitsubishi Zeros, but they bought precious time for Midway's defenses. Chapter 4: Nagumo's Dilemma. As the Japanese bombers returned, Nagumo faced a critical decision. Should he launch a second wave against Midway or rearm his planes to target the newly sighted American fleet? Nagumo chose to wait, a fateful hesitation that would leave his carriers vulnerable. Meanwhile, the American carriers had launched their own strike. From miles away, waves of torpedo bombers and dive bombers sped toward the Japanese fleet. The first attacks were a disaster. Entire squadrons of torpedo bombers were wiped out, their slow and outdated planes no match for Japanese defenses. Yet their sacrifice was not in vain. The chaos created by the torpedo attacks drew Japanese fighters away, clearing the skies for the next wave. Chapter 5: The Turning Point. At 10:22 a.m., American dive bombers from the USS Enterprise in Yorktown arrived. Their timing was perfect. Japanese carriers were laden with fuel, bombs, and aircraft, readying for another strike. In a matter of minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu were engulfed in flames. The pride of the Imperial Navy was burning. The lone surviving carrier, Hiryu, struck back, dealing heavy damage to the Yorktown. But the Americans were relentless. By late afternoon, dive bombers found Hiryu and delivered the final blow. She too was lost. Chapter 6: Aftermath and Legacy. The Battle of Midway was over. Japan had lost 4 carriers, 248 aircraft, and over 3,000 men, a blow from which they would never recover. The Americans, though victorious, paid a heavy price. The USS Yorktown was sunk, and over 300 brave souls were lost. Yet the strategic impact was monumental. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted. Midway was more than a victory. It was a turning point. The Japanese fleet, once feared and unstoppable, would never regain its former strength. The U.S., fueled by its industrial might and the courage of its warriors, seized the initiative in the Pacific War. Let us honor the memory of those who fought and fell in the Pacific, for their sacrifice shaped the world we live in today. Subscribe for more untold stories of courage and history.